Chapter 29. The merchant fleet of the fall of 1836 had filled the Marine Hospital of Quebec with the victims of typhoid fever of the worst kind. In the epidemic, doctors and the majority of the servants were swept away during the winter months. In the spring of 1837, I was almost the only one spared. To prevent panic, the situation at the hospital was kept secret, but by the end of May, I caught the disease, forcing me to reveal the situation to the bishop, so another chaplain could be appointed. The young Monsieur d'Estemenville was chosen. It took me more than an hour to show him all the rooms, and introduce him to the poor, sick, and dying mariners. I felt then so exhausted that 2 friends had to support me on my return to the parsonage of St. Roch. My physicians were immediately called. My case was so serious that 3 other physicians were called in. For 9 days I suffered the most horrible tortures in my brain, and the very marrow of my bones. My only nourishment was a few drops of water. The physicians told the bishop there was no hope. The last sacraments were administered to me, and I prepared myself to die. The 10th day I was absolutely motionless. Though all my physical faculties seemed dead, my memory, intelligence, and soul were acting with more power than ever. During the course of the fever I had awful visions. Once I was surrounded by merciless enemies, whose daggers and swords were plunged through my body. There were many others which I still remember in minute detail. Death had, at first, no terror for me. I had done to the best of my ability all that my church had told me to do to be saved. He is dead. Or if not, he has only a few minutes to live. He is already cold and breathless, and we cannot feel his pulse. Though these words had been said in a very low tone, they fell upon my ears as thunder. "He is dead?" was ringing in my ears. I suddenly saw that I was in danger of being buried alive. Words can't express my horror. An icy wave began to move slowly from my extremities towards my heart. At that moment I made a great effort to be saved by invoking the help of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Like lightning, a terrible vision struck. I saw all my good works and penances in which my church had told me to trust for salvation on one side of the balances of the justice of God. My sins were on the other side. My good works seemed only as a grain of sand compared with the weight of my sins. This awful vision entirely destroyed my false and pharisaical security, and filled my soul with an unspeakable terror. I could not cry to Jesus Christ, nor to God, his Father, for mercy, for I sincerely believed that they were both angry with me because of my sins. With much anxiety, I turned my hopes towards St. Anne and St. Philemon. My confidence in St. Anne came from the numberless crutches, etc., which covered the church of Le Bon Saint Anne du Nord. St. Philomene's body had lately been miraculously discovered, and the world was filled with the noise of the miracles wrought through her intercession. Her medals were everywhere. With entire confidence in the will and power of these 2 saints to obtain any favor for me, I invoked them to pray to God to grant me a few more years of life, and with the utmost honesty of purpose, I promised to add to my penances, live a more holy life in the service of the poor and the sick. Also, I promised to have the painting of the 2 saints put in St. Anne's Church, to proclaim to the world their great power in heaven, if they would obtain my cure and restore my health. Strange to say, the last words of my prayer were scarcely uttered when I saw above my head St. Anne and St. Philomene sitting in the midst of a great light on a beautiful golden cloud. Both were looking at me with great kindness. However, the kindness of St. Anne was mixed with such an air of awe and gravity that I did not like her looks, while St. Philomene had such an expression of superhuman love and kindness that I felt myself drawn to her by a magnetic power when she said distinctly, "You will be cured," and the vision disappeared. But I was cured, perfectly cured. At the disappearance of the 2 saints, I felt as though an electric shock went through my whole frame. The pains were gone. The tongue was untied. The nerves were restored to their natural and usual power. My eyes were opened. The cold and icy waves which were fast going from the extremities to the regions of my heart became a most pleasant warm bath, restoring life and strength to every part of my body. I raised my head, stretched out my hands which had not moved for 3 days, and looking around, I saw the 4 priests. I said to them, "I am cured. Please give me something to eat." Astonished beyond measure, 2 of them threw their arms around my shoulders to help me sit up a moment, and then change my pillow, while 2 others ran to get me some food. "What does this mean?" they all said. "The doctors told us last evening that you were dead, and we have passed the night not only weeping over your death, but praying for your soul, to rescue it from the flames of purgatory. Now you look so hungry, so cheerful and well." I answered, "It means that when I felt that I was to die, I prayed to St. Anne and St. Philomene to come to my help and cure me, and they have come. I have seen them both there above my head. It is St. Philomene who spoke to me as the messenger of the mercies of God. I have promised to have portraits painted and put into the church of the good St. Anne de Nord." The physicians, having heard of my sudden cure, hastened to come and to see what it meant. At first they could scarcely believe their eyes. The night before they had given me up for dead, and there I was, the very next morning, perfectly cured. They minutely asked me all the circumstances connected with that strange, unexpected cure, and I told them simply but plainly what had occurred at the very moment I expected to die. 2 of my physicians were Roman Catholics and 3 Protestants. While the Roman Catholic doctors seemed to believe in my miraculous cure, the Protestants energetically protested against the view in the name of science and common sense. Dr. Douglas put me the following questions, and received the following answers. He said, "Dear Father Chiniquy, you know you have not a more devoted friend in Quebec than I, and you know me too well to suspect that I want to hurt your religious feelings when I tell you that there is not the least appearance of a miracle in your so happy and sudden cure. If you will be kind enough to answer my questions, you will see that you are mistaken in attributing to a miracle a thing which is most common and natural. Though you are perfectly cured, you are very weak. Please answer only yes or no to my questions, in order not to exhaust yourself. Please tell us if this is the first vision you have had during the period of the terrible fever." Answer: "I have had many other visions, but I took them as being the effects of the fever." Doctor: "Please make your answers shorter, or else I will not ask you another question. Please tell us simply if you have not seen in those visions at times very frightful and terrible, and at others very beautiful things." Answer: "Yes, sir." Doctor: "Have not those visions stamped themselves on your mind with such a power and vividness that you never forgot them, and that you deemed them more realities than mere visions of a sickly brain?" Answer: "Yes, sir." Doctor: "Did you not feel sometimes much worse, and sometimes much better after those visions, according to their nature?" Answer: "Yes, sir." Doctor: "When at ease in your mind during that disease, were you not used to pray to the saints, particularly to St. Anne and St. Philomene?" Answer: "Yes, sir." Doctor: "When you considered that death was very near, and it was indeed, when you had heard my imprudent sentence that you had only a few minutes left to live, were you not taken suddenly by such a fear of death as you have never felt before?" Answer: "Yes, sir." Doctor: "Did you not make a great effort to repel death from you?" Answer: "Yes, sir." Doctor: "Do you know that you are a man of an exceedingly strong will, and that very few men can resist you when you want to do something? Do you not know that your will is such an exceptional power, that mountains of difficulties have disappeared before you here in Quebec? Have you not seen even me, with many others, yielding to your will almost in spite of ourselves?" With a smile I answered, "Yes, sir." Doctor: "Do you not remember seeing many times people suffering dreadfully from a toothache, coming to us to have their teeth extracted, who were suddenly cured at the sight of the knives and other surgical instruments we put upon the table for use?" I answered with a laugh, "Yes, sir. I have seen that very often, and it has occurred to me once." Doctor: "Do you think that there was a supernatural power then in the surgical implements, and that those sudden cures of toothache were miraculous?" Answer: "No, sir." Doctor: "Have you not read the volume of the medical dictionary I lent you on the typhoid fever, where several cures exactly like yours are reported?" Answer: "Yes, sir." Then, addressing the physicians, Dr. Douglas said to them, "We must not exhaust our dear Father Chiniquy, but from his answers you understand that there is no miracle here. His sudden cure is a very natural thing. The vision was what we call the turning point of the disease, when the mind is powerfully bent on some very exciting object, when that mysterious thing of which we know so little as yet, called the will, the spirit, the soul, fights as a giant against death, in which battle, pains, diseases, and even death are put to flight and conquered. My dear Father Chiniquy, from your own lips we have it. You have fought, last night, the fever and approaching death, as a giant. No wonder that you won the victory, and I confess it is a great victory. I know it is not the first victory you have gained, and I am sure it will not be the last. God has given you an irresistible will. In that sense only does your cure come from Him. An old proverb says, "There is nothing so difficult as to persuade a man who does not want to be persuaded." Though the reasoning and kind words of the doctor ought to have been gladly listened to, they had only bothered me. It seemed more agreeable to God, and more according to my faith, to believe that I had been miraculously cured. Of course, the bishop, my confessor, and numberless priests and Roman Catholics who visited me during my convalescence confirmed me in my views. The skillful painter, Mr. Plamenon, was called to paint the tableau I had promised to put in the church of St. Anne de Noord. It was one of the most beautiful and remarkable paintings of that artist. 3 months after my recovery, I was at the parsonage of the curate of St. Anne, the Reverend Mr. Renvoys, a relative of mine. He was about 65 years of age, very rich, and had a magnificent library. When young, he had enjoyed the reputation of being one of the best preachers in Canada. It was evening when I arrived with my tableau. As soon as we were left alone, the old curate said, "Is it possible, my dear young cousin, that you will make such a fool of yourself tomorrow? Your so-called miraculous cure was a dream of your sickly brain, as it generally occurs in the moment of the supreme crisis of the fever. It is what is called the turning point of the disease, when a desperate effort of nature kills or cures the patient. As for the vision of the beautiful girl whom you call Saint Philomene, who has done you so much good, she is not the first girl, surely, who has come to you in your dreams, and done you good." At these words he laughed so heartily that I feared he would split his sides. Twice he repeated the unbecoming joke. I was at first so shocked at his unexpected rebuke, which I considered to border on blasphemy, that I came very near to leaving without a word. But after a moment's reflection, I said to him, "How can you speak with such levity on so solemn a thing? Do you not believe in the power of the saints, who, being more holy and pure than we are, see God face to face, speak to Him, and obtain favors which He would refuse us rebels? Are you not the daily witness of the miraculous cures wrought in your own church, under your own eyes? Thousands of crutches literally cover the walls of your church." My earnest appeal to the daily miracles, the mere mention of the crutches, produced such a Homeric laugh that I was disconcerted and saddened beyond measure. I remained absolutely mute. I wished I had never come. When he had laughed at me to his heart's content, he said, "My dear cousin, you are the first one to whom I speak in this way. I do it because, first, I consider you a man of intelligence, and I hope you will understand me. Secondly, because you are my cousin. Were you one of those idiotic priests, real blockheads who form the clergy today, or a stranger, I would let you go your way believing those ridiculous, degrading superstitions of your poor ignorant people. I have known you from your infancy, and I knew your father. He was one of my dearest friends. You are very young, and I very old. It is a duty of honor and conscience to reveal to you a thing which I have kept secret between my God and myself. I have been here more than 30 years, and though your country is constantly filled with the noise of the great and small miracles wrought in my church every day, I am ready to swear before God and to prove to any man of common sense that not a single miracle has been wrought in my church since I came here. Every one of those miraculous cures are sheer deceptions, the work of either fools or skillful impostors and hypocrites. Believe me, my dear cousin, I have studied carefully the history of all those crutches. 99 out of 100 have been left by poor, lazy beggars, who, at first, thought with good reason that, by walking from door to door with 1 or 2 crutches, they would create more sympathy and bring more into their purses. Those crutches are the keys to open both hearts and purses. But the day comes when that beggar has bought a pretty good farm with his stolen alms, or when he is really tired and disgusted with his crutches and wants to get rid of them. How can he do this without compromising himself? By a miracle. Then he will sometimes travel hundreds of miles from door to door, begging as usual, but this time he asks for the prayers of the whole family, saying, I am going to the good Saint Anne de Noord to ask her to cure my leg or legs. I hope she will cure me, as she has cured so many others. I have great confidence in her power. Each one gives twice, nay, 10 times as much as before to the poor cripple, making him promise that if he is cured, he will return so that they may bless the good Saint Anne with him. When he arrives here, he gives me sometimes $1, sometimes $5 to say Mass for him. I take the money, for I would be a fool to refuse it when I know that his purse has been so well filled. During the celebration of the Mass, when he receives the communion, I hear generally a great noise, cries of joy. A miracle! A miracle! The crutches are thrown on the floor, and the cripple walks as well as you or I. And the last act of the religious comedy is the most lucrative one, for he fulfills his promise, stopping at every house he had ever been to with his crutches. He gives a detailed account of his miraculous cure. Tears of joy flow from every eye. The last cent of that family is generally given to the impostor. This is the case in 99 out of 100 cures wrought in my church. The 100th is given upon people as honest, but, pardon the expression, as blind and superstitious as you are. They were really cured, for they were really sick. But their cures are the natural effects of the great efforts of the will. It is the result of a happy combination of natural causes which work together on the frame and kill the pain, expel the disease, and restore the health, just as I was cured of a most horrible toothache some years ago. In pain, I went to the dentist. Hardly had his knife and other surgical instruments come before my eyes when the pain disappeared. I quietly took my hat and left, bidding a hearty goodbye to the dentist, who laughed at me to his heart's content every time we met. One of the weakest points of our religion is in the ridiculous, I venture to say, diabolical, miracles performed and believed every day among us, with the so-called relics and bones of the saints. But don't you know that for the most part these relics are nothing but chickens' or sheep's bones? And what could I not say were I to tell you what I know of the daily miraculous impostures of the scapulars, holy water, chaplets, and medals of every kind? Were I a pope, I would throw all these mummeries which come from paganism into the sea, and would present to the eyes of the sinners nothing but Christ and Him crucified as the object of their faith and hope, just as the apostles Peter and James do in their epistles. I cannot repeat here all that I heard that night from the old relative against the ridiculous practices of the Church of Rome. It would take too long, for he spoke 3 hours as a real Protestant. Sometimes what he said seemed to me according to common sense, but it was against the practices of my church, and against my personal practices. I was exceedingly scandalized and pained, and not at all convinced. I pitied him for having lost his former faith and piety. I told him at the end, without ceremony, I heard long ago that the bishops did not like you, but I knew not why. However, if they could hear what you think and say here about the miracles of St. Anne, they would surely interdict you. Will you betray me? He added, and will you report our conversation to the bishop? No, my cousin, I replied. I would prefer to be burnt to ashes. I will not sell your kind of hospitality for the traitor's money. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when we parted to go to our sleeping rooms, but that night was again a sleepless one. It was sad and strange for me to see that old and learned priest was secretly a Protestant. The next morning, the crowds arrived to hear the history of my miraculous cure and see with their own eyes the picture of the 2 saints who had appeared to me. At 10 a.m., more than 10,000 people were crowded in and around the church. After describing the miracle, I disclosed the picture and presented it to their admiration and worship. There were tears rolling on every cheek, and cries of admiration and joy from every lip. The picture represented me dying in my bed of sufferings with the 2 saints, a distance above me, stretching their hands as if to say, "You will be cured." It was hung on the wall, in a conspicuous place, where thousands and thousands have come to worship it from that day to the year 1858, when the curate was ordered by the bishop to burn it, for that was the very year God took the scales away from my eyes. The apparition of the 2 saints had left such a deep impression on my mind that during the first week after my conversion, I often said to myself, how is it that I now believe that the Church of Rome is false, when such a miracle has been wrought on me as one of her priests. About a month after my conversion, I again caught typhoid fever. For 12 days I experienced the same tortures and agonies as in 1837. But this time, I was really happy to die. There was no fear of seeing my good works as a grain of sand and the mountains of my iniquities in the balance of God against me. I was trusting in Jesus alone to be saved. It was the blood of Jesus, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world for me, which was in the balance. I had no fear then, for I knew that I was saved by Jesus, and that salvation was a perfect act of His love, His mercy, and His power. Consequently, I was glad to die. The 13th day of my sufferings, the doctor had left me saying the very same words of the doctors of Quebec. He has only a few minutes to live, if he is not dead already. Although for 3 or 4 days I had not given any sign of life, I was perfectly conscious. I heard the words of the doctor, and I was glad to exchange the miseries of this short life for the eternity of glory which my Savior had bought for me. I only regretted to die before bringing more of my dear countrymen out of the idolatrous religion of Rome. From the lips of my soul I said, "Dear Jesus, I am glad to go with thee just now, but if it be thy will to let me live a few years more, that I may spread the light of the gospel among my countrymen, and I will bless thee eternally with my converted countrymen for thy mercy." This prayer had scarcely reached the mercy seat when I saw a dozen bishops marching towards me, sword in hand, to kill me. As the first sword was raised to split my head, I made a desperate effort, wrenched it from the hand of my would-be murderer, and struck such a blow on his neck that his head rolled on the floor. The second, third, fourth, and so on to the last, rushed to kill me. But I struck with such terrible blows on the neck of every one of them that 12 heads were rolling on the floor, swimming in a pool of blood. In my excitement, I cried to my friends around me, "Do you not see the heads rolling and the blood flowing on the floor?" And suddenly I felt a kind of electric shock from head to foot. I was cured. Perfectly cured. I asked my friends for something to eat. I had not taken any food for 12 days, and with tears of joy and gratitude to God, they complied with my request. This last was not only the perfect cure of the body, but it was a perfect cure of the soul. I understood then clearly that the first was not more miraculous than the second. I had had a perfect understanding of the diabolical forgeries and miracles of Rome. In both cases, I was not cured or saved by the saints, the bishops, or the popes, but by my God, through His Son, Jesus.